context is extremely important. Developers reports that 33 to 80% depend on which tech and how you ask it. And that's their number one request from coding agents to improve. Like when you're thinking about context, on one hand, it is like you have too much, not accurate. The other is like exactly only what you need.
Yeah.
In the middle could be like a lot of non-relevant, but all the relevant, etc.
Yeah.
So one of the hardest things is actually bringing the right context and then making sure it's only that there. These are the priorities, and then that could define a lot.
There are certain tasks that are super repeatable, super automatable, where you can get just another level of automation, another level of productivity boost by running multiple agents in the cloud. What we've tried to build with OpenHands SDK is like a single framework that allows you to create multiple different agents, and then getting those agents talking to each other. It gives you kind of like a single framework for thinking about how to coordinate multiple agents together.
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode. Hey, I'm here still at QCon, and look who I bumped into in the corridor. Itamar Friedman, CEO of Qodo. Itamar, how are you?
Great to bump into you.
Absolutely.
Such a great conference, so it's really having fun here.
And of course, you've been on AI Native Dev twice, I think.
so, yeah.
Twice, yeah.
I'm on a row.
But first time on the podcast.
Yeah.
First time on the podcast. What was your session about today, Itamar? I think you've just given it.
Yeah, I just came back from it there. So multi-agent system, I gave a motivation behind why you want to have that to start with, like specifically for software development, talking about like code quality, bad code, good code, software development lifecycle in general, and how we want to cover it. And that was the first half of the motivation. And then like we dived into different architectural decisions that you need to make when you're implementing multi-agent systems, when you're developing a multi-agent system for your software development lifecycle.
Interesting.
Actually, it was a paper by Google just recently, so I even managed to squeeze that inside. It's 5 days old.
But yeah, oh really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's nice. Good timing.
Yeah.
So when you talk about multiple or multi-agent systems, are you talking about multiple agents that can then therefore like code in parallel, or are you talking about different agents that do different roles, different jobs, look after each other, where one codes, the other one code reviews, that kind of thing?
Exactly that. I mean, like you can have multi coding agents, both like all of them writing code in parallel or sequential, and you need to decide how you want to do that. You can have a diversity of agents with different roles, and why we talked about why you need them at all, and then like how do you do they run in parallel or after like the coding agents or before? So roughly speaking, there's multiple considerations you need to have. For example, let me give you like a concrete example. Let's say that you have an agent that helps you with the planning, and then you have an agent that helps you with the coding, and then they don't agree with each other. How do you decide like how do you have a third agent, which is arbitrary, that makes a decision, etc. And like there's different consideration that you need to have.
Is there value in saying like I'm going to use different models, different agents, different vendors of agents in terms of doing different roles? I guess it's almost like having diversity in a team, right? Where you have different people thinking differently and almost like contradicting each other, where you almost like say, well, actually, this is how I think this should be done. If you have all agents that are the same agents, but still having those different roles. What's the contrast between those two scenarios? So
I think some people, when they're thinking about different agents, the first like thing pops into mind. Some people is like, okay, I give it a different prompt or something like that. That architecture is basically like an architecture of one single agent that rules them all. That all you need to do is give it different tools and different like prompt or so. That's one option. The other option is that the agents are much more different than that. For example, their entire architecture, their graph of how they build might be completely different. For example, if you're dealing with a coding agent, then in order to really do its job, like it's actually, at least until now, proven that you need to enable its creativity. Because we developers, we bump into a lot of issues and we bypass and this and that, and actually, the fact that the core is an LLM making the decision is a good architecture for a coding agent. At least what we're seeing, for example, in Swebench, if you're familiar. And then when you're talking about other types of agents, for example, you want to have a security agent or you want to have a code review agent, that agent might want to have actually much more structure. Checking A, B, C, D. For example, you might have like 100 rules. That's how do you get them? It's a subtopic we can talk about. You want to have 100 rules that you want to make sure that are obeyed. And then you want that agent, the review agent, to be much more structured. There is an LLM there, but the graph of that agent might be like 1 to 10, where LLM is involved, but actually it's quite structured there. So, and by the way, you might give it different permissions, etc. So overall, like there is a discussion: do you have one agent that rules it all, or multiple agents? What we're seeing, of course, like when you're dealing with enterprise grade, heavy duty, brownfield, when compliance, standardization, etc., you must have like different agents that are completely different than each other, have different contexts, have different.
And do you find different vendors? So maybe like, I don't know, a Claude or Claude or something like that. Do you find like that will be better in a specific role? So like, is there a specific
definitely.
vendor that is best for code reviews or security testing, like you said?
Yeah, actually, it's a good point to continue from my last point, where different vendors have different DNA and different like point of view on the world. Like Anthropic believe, at least what I understand, is that models everything. And you need to give that model the brain of everything, and you need to give them like agents in order to operate in the world. These tools need to be quite simple, actually on the fly. Why do you need to start doing retrieval augmented generation? Just give it a simple tool like ASD grep, etc.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty good, like I believe, let's say structure and way of thinking for coding agents.
Yeah.
But then when you look under security review agent, if you're familiar, like 3, 4, 5 months ago, what all the rage, and you take a look on the prompt, you are now a security review agent. And then there is a prompt, and then there is like a list of exclusion. Don't look at DDoS, don't look on that. Like basically it's, when you're doing a security agent, you need 1 minus of that.
Yeah.
Here is everything that you need to check rigorously, and then you can be creative on all the rest.
Yeah.
When you're doing coding agent, you want to relax it and say what not. But when you're doing a security agent, then actually you need to do a 1 minus of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I would use their Claude Code, for example, as a vendor when you're talking about Claude Code as coding agent. But I don't think it's like you can just set up with a different prompt to be like all type of agents out there. You need a different vendor.
Absolutely. And very briefly, because I see people are kicking out now, so it might get a bit noisy.
Yeah.
But very briefly, in terms of context, like security is a great example where there's a ton of context that you can provide an agent to say, look, here are your rules. This is what you have to check for. At what point does the task that you give an agent just become so overwhelming it starts doing a poor job? Security review is a great example. Code review maybe even with a large number of styling rules and those types of things. Where's the limit for that?
Yeah, context is extremely important. I can say superlative context is the king, the kingdom, etc. But it's extremely important. Actually, I talked about it that developers reports that 33 to 80% depends on which tech and how you ask it. Think that context is actually the major problem of bad quality and hallucination and things like that. And that's our number one request from coding agent to improve. The thing is that context is not just one thing. It's not just a code base. It could be, for example, a database of vulnerabilities. It could be, for example, Qodo is a leading AI code review tool. For example, we have a database related to best practices and rules that we project depending on the stack of what you have, etc. And we learn it from different interaction with developers in the context engine. So we collect a database that related to best practices and rules. And then it's really you really need to fetch the right context. And then it's not just when you're thinking about context, on one hand it is you have too much, not accurate. The other is exactly only what you need.
Yeah.
In the middle, for example, it could be a lot of non-relevant but all the relevant, etc.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a spectrum. And of course, the one of the hardest thing is actually bringing the right context. And then what we see, the hardest is bringing the right context and then making sure it's only that there.
Yeah.
These are the priorities.
Yeah.
And then that could define a lot. For example, as I mentioned, security companies might have context relevant for security that regular coding agent do not have. Code review solution like Qodo might have additional context that is relevant to best practice standard, etc. that regular coding agent don't have. That's how the way I look at it. How do you bring the right context and then cut that you don't have too much, because there is the context rots. If you want to read more about it, that's
yeah.
like Anthropic and other companies talk about the context rots.
Yeah, super interesting, and yeah, so correct, so right as well, because context, giving too much context, you think, okay, I've got all these rules that I need to follow, you throw it all in one go, and actually it's just going to forget what it wants to forget, or it's not going to add it, it's not going to
I think like if I connect all the dots we talked about, context is very important, maybe one of the most important, and then is how you use them. When you upload, for example, context Cloud Code or Cursor, for them it's like part of the, part of their like just literally the context, and then they just keep pushing that in the context in their graph. If you like give it same prompt with the same context 7 times, you get 7 different solutions.
Yeah.
But so like I do want to say like context is important, but then how you use it. While maybe other tools will use it very differently, more like in a workflow, verifying different things, etc. So context is extremely important, and I just want to add on what you're saying. Not completely following the context is also a matter of how you build the agents.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's another point.
Absolutely.
Consider.
Itamar, it's been awesome. It's been awesome catching up. Hello, joining me here is Robert Brennan, who is the CEO of OpenHands. Robert, good to see you here.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
And of course, I saw you here, well not here, but in New York only a few weeks ago for AI Native DevCon.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, no, likewise.
What's your session going to be about today?
So we're going to be talking about how to scale code maintenance with AI agents. I would say there's a lot of tasks where developers are, for their day-to-day feature development, they're used to like pairing with Claude Code or the OpenHands CLI locally on their laptop. And that works great for your like ad hoc work. You pick up a ticket, you need to work on it. But there are certain tasks that are super repeatable, super automatable, where you can get just another level of automation, another level of productivity boost by running multiple agents in the cloud to take down these like very automatable, tech debt-oriented tasks.
Awesome. And I guess when we talk about maintenance, what kind of things are we talking about? Typical maintenance tasks that a developer would do.
Yeah, so very typical things would be things like dependency management, resolving open source vulnerabilities that happen in your code base. And then some meatier tasks like, maybe upgrading from Python 2 to Python 3, or upgrading, from an old version of Java to a new version of Java, maybe migrating from COBOL to Java or another more modern programming language. There's a lot of these like toily tasks that developers don't really like doing. They don't involve a lot of creativity or critical thinking. It's mostly just a lot of like churning out lines of code, but they're still too big for a single agent to one-shot in many cases.
Right.
And so doing what we call agent orchestration can allow you to, put some forethought into how you're going to solve this repeatable problem in a way that can scale across many code bases, and then just, automate it 90% of the way there, and just have a human in the loop for, the very little bit where you need that last bit of verification.
So let's talk about agent orchestration then. So when we talk about agent orchestration, we're obviously talking about multiple agents. Do they have to be the same agent, or can they just be different vendors, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to be working within like a single agent framework, right? There's nothing necessarily stopping, one agent from talking to another agent. And there are, there's the A2A protocol and things like that. But what we've tried to build with OpenHands SDK is like a single framework that allows you to create multiple different agents with like different system prompts, different sets of tools that they have access to, different MCP servers that they have access to, and maybe different behavior patterns, right? And then getting those agents talking to each other is, it gives you kind of like a single framework for thinking about how to coordinate multiple agents together.
Right. And when we start with kind of like a large task, typically that a number of agents can all work on.
Yeah.
We don't obviously just throw that large task at all these agents, this
Yeah.
group of agents. We need to break that task down.
Exactly.
What's the process of kind of breaking that down? Is there an amount of human interaction in that, or can we somewhat automate that for AI as well?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the most critical step is like, how are you going to break this problem down into sub pieces that individual agents can execute on, right? So I think that's where the most human thought goes into the process. But you can, work with, an LLM like Claude, for instance, to kind of talk through the problem and help, like get some help from an LLM to break down the problem into manageable bite-sized tasks. But you're also going to have to really lean on your own intuition for what is actually solvable, what's reviewable by a human. What can you give to the agent that you can then look at on the other end when it gives you some output and quickly verify, did it do the thing or did it not?
How important is parallelization in this? Because I guess when we think about like breaking down that task, not all of it can kind of run all at the same time. So we need some level of dependency where
one thing relies upon or depends on the output of the other.
Yeah.
How's that graph almost worked out?
Yeah, I think the more you can parallelize, the better, especially for these very big tasks.
Yeah.
Like a really good example is we have one client that's literally fielding thousands of new CVE announcements per day across their very massive code base. And what they do is they send out agents in parallel to go solve those CVEs across the entire code base. If they were trying to do that iteratively, it would just take forever, right? But being able to parallelize this, A, means they go a lot faster, and B, means that if like one of these CVEs fails to resolve, maybe there's just like no way to resolve it. We don't get stuck, right? You have 90% might get solved, and then you can focus on that 10% that like didn't quite make it through. But yeah, very, very tricky to figure out how to decompose a task so that you can get the most amount out of parallelization.
I guess like there's an amount of human to agent interaction here as well. At what stage does the human what stage is there kind of like more chat or more preparation? Does the human then just kind of like leave it and then just wait for all the results to come in? How much interaction is there?
I think it's very, very task dependent, right? And that's when we talk about agent orchestration and like the skill that goes into agent orchestration, a big consideration you need to take into account as you use agents to solve a particular problem is where am I going to stick the human in the loop so that I can understand that these are working well, that the agents aren't just like going, spending hours and, hundreds of dollars or even more, going down a wrong path, right? You want to make sure that there are regular check-ins to make sure that, the agents are on the right track. And that, you're not shipping anything into production that a human hasn't like properly reviewed and QA tested and things like that.
And there's a big trust issue there as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like in terms of when we are thinking about, okay, let's update some, potential new CVEs and some dependencies or whatever it is, there's an amount of production code that's being touched. And there's always a danger. My background in Sneak, whenever there was a kind of like change, there's an amount of effort in that change that is required that could potentially cause an issue in production. How, like in your experience, do you see people onboarding to this type of mentality of, I'm just going to allow these agents to go and do their thing? What is there a build-up or growth of trust that needs to occur?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage folks to start small. Dependency updates are a great one that, we're actually pretty used to that being automated with things like Dependabot. AI agents allow you to get like another level of automation there for when there are like breaking API changes and things like that. There might be a few lines of code that need to change. But yeah, starting with smaller tasks that are easier for the human to verify, easier to QA, is definitely the way to kind of like get your feet wet with this sort of thing. And then as you build trust and as you build intuition for what agents do well and what they don't do well, then you can like increase the scale of your efforts here as you start to build that trust.
Yeah. Awesome. So if a developer wanted to get started with this and get going and use OpenHands to do that, what would the way you would recommend where should they go to get started, but what would the first steps be to build this in?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing would be to identify some repeatable problem that happens in your organization, right? So a very common one would be like, we have a bunch of repos that are using Java version 8, which is, way out of support. We want to get everybody to Java version 21. Maybe we've got 100 repos that have this problem. I would start by picking one of those repos and using like the OpenHands CLI or our web UI to just iterate through the problem yourself, like try to prompt your way to success and see what that takes. And you'll get more intuition for the problem and more intuition for like how agents are able to help you solve this problem. So yeah, I think once you've built up that intuition for the problem by doing it kind of manually and prompting your way to it, then you can use an SDK like the OpenHands SDK to actually encode that as Python or some other programming language. You can put that intuition kind of into enforcement and build an orchestrated pipeline for achieving that across many different repositories, something that can be repeated.
And that's a really nice parallelization route as well. It's the same thing, but just across many, many repos. I love the idea of learning that by yourself, the more manual way, and then trying to scale that out, because you learn, I guess, as a developer, you'll know, there's a little gotcha here that I wasn't thinking about that. If I had scaled that straight away, it would have been a problem.
Exactly.
And one final question. What are the kind of the nicest scenarios for a developer to start with this kind of thing? Obviously, they can probably kick it off through the APIs themselves.
Yeah.
Are there ways in which we can integrate this through triggers, maybe PR requests that have been opened, all those types of things as well?
Totally, yeah. So OpenHands integrates basically anywhere developers live, right? Slack, GitHub, Jira, GitLab, Bitbucket, basically anywhere there's information that you might want to pull into an agent, you can just say @OpenHands do the thing. And then I would say for more advanced use cases, we also have like an API where You can build some automation so that, say, anytime a certain event happens in Datadog, you can then use that to kick off an OpenHands session via the API and fix the underlying error. So even if that error happens at like 2 in the morning, you wake up to a pull request that fixes it the next day.
Amazing. Well, Robert, you've got a session to go to in about 40 minutes, so looking forward to hearing more about that. But pleasure to see you here again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Cheers.